have seen the torch of freedom pass from hand to yearning hand, and the vision of our fathers spread hope throughout this land, as the dream some fought and died for in my heart becomes my own. I will strive to keep her promise, America, my home. America, America, may God bless America, and freedom reign across America, my home. From the shorelines to the prairies, to the cities great and small, we have reaped the fruits of justice and liberty for all.
So with deep appreciation for the blessings of freedom that we know in this great and wonderful land of ours, I'm Dr. George Simon, welcoming you to another edition of Character Matters. This is the program where we talk about what I consider to be the defining issue of our time, the character crisis we face, and the impact that it has on just about every aspect of our lives. And if you want to join the conversation, the number to call is 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296. Give us a call if you have a question you want to ask, if you have a story or a circumstance you want to share, if you have a situation that you're dealing with that you want some advice about, happy to take your call at 718-717-8296. Well, I'm going to be doing another series of professional workshops in just a couple of weeks. A week from next Wednesday, as a matter of fact, a week from this coming Wednesday, I will be in Columbus, Ohio, and then traveling to Cincinnati, Ohio, and then to Indianapolis, Indiana. And you can find information about those workshops if you're a mental health professional, psychiatrist, psychologist, social worker, addiction counselor, licensed professional counselor, nurse practitioner, any kind of mental health professional. Even if you're in the business of law enforcement, or if you're dealing with individuals who are within the probation and parole system, whatever the case may be, if you're dealing with disturbed characters of any kind in a professional setting, you might want to attend these workshops. And so you can find information about them on my blog site at manipulative-people.com. That's www.manipulative-people.com. And also on the Cross Country Educational Seminars website at crosscountryeducation.com. That's Cross Country Education. You can look them up on Google and get to their website. And as I mentioned before, also on my blog site at manipulative-people.com. You can also find on my blog timely articles on dealing with disturbed characters and timely articles on the phenomenon of our time, on no greater display than it has been in this year's presidential primary campaigns. What a cast of characters we have. You know, it's sobering. I don't get into political discussions on this program. I really believe and have believed for a long time that it all comes down to character. You hear a song that my wife and I were inspired to write. You hear that at the beginning of the program and at the end of the program, and its overall message is that freedom works, and it is a great and treasured commodity, but it only works when those who are given the freedom are of the character necessary to live up to the ideals upon which great societies are founded. If you leave decent people alone, people of good character, people who not only strive to take care of themselves and their families, but also strive to make this place a better place for all of us, make this world a better place, and do their part to build their communities, to care for those who truly cannot adequately care for themselves. When you leave such folks alone, they not only prosper, but the society that they create prospers as well. Framers knew this. Freedom is a precious commodity. But in the hands of the character disturbed, unfortunately, freedom can be a real liability. And there's this great temptation on the part of government to encroach upon the freedoms of everyone by making rules and restrictions, laws, that necessarily inherently have to limit freedom. Now, the decent folks among us, with their own moral compass, don't really need these rules to guide them. They live by that golden rule. They don't have to have somebody threatening them with jail time for lying, thieving, or cheating their fellow man. But in the absence of that, when greed governs, when disregard for human welfare governs, when entitlement is the attitude of the day, well, then there's always the temptation of government to try and legislate morality. And it never works. We have millions of laws on the books right now, millions of them. Not one of us of decency lives our lives mindful of every one of those million rules. We go about our lives doing the things we do based on an internal compass of ethics. Maybe that ethics is born out of our personal philosophy of life. Maybe it's born out of the religion to which we subscribe. Maybe it's born of an even deeper spirituality than that. Maybe it's born of our humanism. But whatever the case may be, decent folks don't need these restrictions on their freedom. And the founders knew that the maximum freedom would lead to maximum prosperity. They knew this, but they also knew that it wouldn't work unless the country were made up of folks who had solid internal moral compasses. That's what makes it all work. And so I witnessed these so-called campaigns, these power seekers among us who Who would lead us? And I think to myself, what a cast of characters, only a handful, of whom I have even a modicum of respect for. And this is a tragedy. This is a tragedy beyond tragedies. All of our other problems pale in comparison because they all stem from this problem. We would not have our massive debt. We would not have our social problems. We certainly wouldn't have the highest percentage per capita of any free society with their population behind bars or confined in some way because they can't even be trusted to function independently without hurting other people. This is a disaster. If these numbers were part of any disease, any physical disease, the outcry would never cease. It would never cease. People die in this country from conflict born of misguided turf warfare, hate, a misguided sense of trying to dominate, to exert power and authority in the absence of being able to do it in a civil manner. More people die in this country as a result of these things than any disease that you've read about that comes along once in a million years and gets people all upset. Now there's news of a virus that is kind of taking off in the tropics because weather conditions and other conditions have been right to kind of nurture it. And there's all kinds of talk about it on the media. People up in arms. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? When the character crisis has been with us for many decades now and is only growing worse. And perhaps the most illustrative example is the fact that when you go trying to find someone of character that you might actually be able to put your faith in to be your representative in governmental affairs, it's almost impossible to find one. Oh, we have plenty of people offering to do the job. But it's just absolutely ridiculous what we have. We're as divided as we've ever been as a country. And it's not getting better. It's getting worse. We don't talk to each other. We don't care for one another. And we're living far, far, far behind our means and leaving a mess behind. Something's got to give. Something has got to give. And I want to tell you, when I was doing workshops a couple of weeks ago for professionals on this whole problem of character disturbance, I was struck by something in particular. I had expected, it's been about 15 years since I have been actively doing workshops. There were many health reasons that caused me to have to curtail those activities several years ago. And so I thought that with so many years having passed, that a lot more professionals would be more attuned to the evolved science of our time, that they would have by this time come to appreciate the nature of character disturbance, the fact that it is by and large the main problem that folks face these days. We hear a lot of talk about the biochemistry of various mental illnesses. But those cases where, through absolutely no fault of the person, their biochemistry has just gone wacky. For example, we know that postpartum that was a real mangled phrase there, but postpartum depression, a chemical imbalance that can occur right after conception of a child, delivery of a child on a mother's part, where because hormone imbalances and other biochemical imbalances can be created in the aftermath of birth, that moms can get really incredibly depressed, inexplicably depressed. And it's strictly a matter of biochemistry. Those kinds of things happen. But for the most part, by and large, those are not the majority kinds of situations that come to the attention of mental health professionals these days. Mental health professionals of all types, whether they be psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, licensed counselors, whatever their stripes might be, their professional stripes, whatever their discipline might be, most of the time they're asked to deal with folks whose chemistry is okay, or maybe it's a little out of whack, but not so because it got that way all by itself. But most of the time they're dealing with folks who basically haven't learned how to manage their lives, who haven't grown up, at least not to the point where they know what it means to lead a responsible life. And they haven't learned to master themselves, to take stock of their own personal inclinations, their shortcomings, their strengths, their weaknesses, and manage them effectively and make of themselves decent people. So they make a mess of things. They make a mess of things in their relationships. They make a mess of things at work, at home, in the community at large. And then somebody wants to coax them into therapy, a therapy that was never meant to help in such situations. And so what I found that was really surprising to me is I did find that the professionals that I spoke to were well aware that this is the problem. They knew that 7 out of 10 of their clients were going to have some character-related problems. They knew that to be the case. But I was absolutely stunned to realize that after all this time and all the growth of science around how to intervene more effectively with character-impaired folks, that so many folks in the various professions were still inadequately trained to deal with the problem. This was stunning to me. Of course, it's going to keep me busy doing trainings, but it was still stunning to me that people are still, professionals are still coming out of their professional education, out of their formal training, equipped with tools and perspectives that were designed for a much different time. And so they really basically don't know how to help. And as many folks have written me to say through my blog at manipulative-people.com, they've written me to say that they have experienced what I've written about before, a phenomenon called therapy-induced trauma. This is basically where a person has been living with or having to deal with a disturbed character of some type, and they've gone for help. And instead of getting help, perhaps the character-impaired person they were with was a good charmer or impression manager, as we call it, and charmed or manipulated or otherwise created sufficient false impressions with the therapist to form an alliance with the therapist against the victim of the abusive relationship who came in for help, so the aggrieved party ends up feeling victimized a second time and traumatized a second time, feeling even more crazy than when they first came in, wondering whether in fact they are the crazy one when they knew in their heart, which is why they came to seek help, that the person that they were living with or having to deal with was the person with the problem. And so it was really striking to me that after all this time and after all this information, that there still is such a need for professional training. So that's what I'm going to be doing a lot of this year. And although the trainings are for professionals, anyone can attend. So it would be fair if someone wanted to attend the workshop. There'll be some things that you probably wouldn't want to comment on or wouldn't even be able to fairly comment on. And also the price tag is not average person friendly. It's more in line with what professionals would expect to have to pay for formal medical or other continuing education units. So the price tag is a bit high, but anyone is welcome to these workshops. And as I said earlier in the program, I'll be in Columbus first on Wednesday. I believe that's February 10th. And then I'll be in Cincinnati that following Thursday, the 11th. And then I'll be in Indianapolis, Indiana on that Friday, the 12th of February. And so I'm hoping that all of you who are interested and are in the area and that want to attend, look up the information either at my manipulative-people.com blog site or on the Cross Country Education website. Just Google Cross Country Education. Their seminars are well reputed, and you can get the information there. Best way to find the information is just to search the seminars by my name, George Simon, and you'll come up with the schedule of seminars. We're now planning for May's locations. I'll be doing 2 different sets. I'll be doing 6 workshops in May. And I won't have the details for you until later this month. Well, it's the end of January now, but sometime toward the end of February. I'm already in my mind here. I'm kind of into February. February 1st, tomorrow, just happens to be my 68th birthday. And if I had known that I was going to live this long, I would have taken much better care of myself, as they say. But I'm doing my best to do that. And I'm looking forward to a little celebration later this evening. As a matter of fact, right after the program closes, I'm going to meet up with my family. We're going to go out for a little dinner and have a little celebration. I happen to share a birthday weekend with my granddaughter, who just turned 6 yesterday. So we celebrated that. But I'll be celebrating my own birthday with my family just a few moments after we close the program tonight. So I'm looking forward to that. Not looking forward to being another year older. And I am looking forward in the next couple of years to really fully retiring and laying back and enjoying life. But in the meantime, we're trying to get the message out there. I have a new book that will be coming out here now. I hope in the next couple of months I'll have more news for you. You'll also be able to get some information on the blog site at manipulative-people.com and also on my website at drgeorgesimon.com. That's drgeorgesimon.com. I'll have information for you about the book, How Did We End Up Here? And that would likely be available through Amazon sometime at the end of March or in early April. So I'll have more information for you on that. That is a book that you'll want to get if you're either in the midst of a relationship that has you scratching your head and having you wonder how in the world you ended up in the mess that you're in, or you have come to the end of a relationship and it's just exited, that has been a nightmare experience for you, and you're wondering, you're looking back to kind of examine what happened and hopefully inoculate yourself against a future mess of the like that you've just been through. And then also the book will address how we ended up in the state we're in as a society and what we need to do about it to restore some kind of sanity. So I'll have more details for you in the next few weeks about How Did We End Up Here, a book that I've written with Catherine Armistead. Kathy is just a wonderful co-writer. She has many good experiences of her own, and she brings a lot to the effort by mining basically a lot of my blog articles and a lot of my other writings that I never formally assembled into a book before. And she helped me do that, and I'm really grateful to her for that. So I'll have more to say about How Did We End Up Here in the next couple of weeks. So I invite you once again to avail yourself of my books, In Sheep's Clothing, Understanding and Dealing with Manipulative People, the international bestseller on manipulative characters, many regard as the definitive work on the subject. And then my book, Character Disturbance, The Phenomenon of Our Age, my in-depth look at all the disturbed characters out there, the vast spectrum of character disturbance, and what it's like to live with a character-disordered person or have to deal with such a person like that at work, etc., and also what to look for when you go looking for help so that you can actually get the right kind of help. And then my book for the Christian faith community, The Judas Syndrome, about how genuine faith can truly save and transform a person's life. So avail yourself of the books, avail yourself of the blog articles. I also write for a popular blog based in the UK called Psychology, Philosophy, and Real Life. At the URL www.counselingresource.com. That's counseling with 2 L's resource.com. I have timely articles on that site as well. And once again, if you want to join the conversation, or if you have a question you want to ask, you have a situation you want to run by me for some advice, or you have a story that you'd like to share that you think the audience would appreciate, give us a call at 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296. I want to get back just a little bit to the discussion on this primary season, just beginning with the Iowa caucuses due to begin tomorrow. I was just in Iowa, in Des Moines, as a matter of fact, just 2 weeks ago, week and a half ago, actually. And folks, of course, were busy going to events where they were in various town hall meetings and whatnot, listening to the candidates. But it is truly remarkable for me to witness this parade of characters that has the moxie and has the grandiosity to think that they're really of the kind of character that can carry our country forward. You know, we need a lot in the way of good leadership because we're in a pretty significant cultural hole right now. Our sociocultural fabric has unfortunately seen a transformation in the last 40 or 50 years. It's been kind of a slippery slope. And on the one hand, I do see some bright spots. I see in many of our younger folks a yearning for a different kind of world. And this idealism that I see is encouraging. But, you know, the idealism of youth needs to be tempered with a certain degree of wisdom about how things actually can happen. For that, you need some leadership. And I just don't see it out there. What I see instead, I see a lot of folks who are beholden to a lot of special interests. Some big money behind some folks. And there will be a price to pay for that. You know, they say money can't buy votes. Well, in fact, it has too big an influence and has had for a long time in our political system. And you hear politicians tell you that they can't be bought, but in fact, when you look at the records, when you look at the kinds of legislation that gets passed, judges that get appointed, decisions that get made, money talks. Money talks a lot. And you have the Supreme Court even regarding money itself as speech. Now, in the face of that, you really need some folks of incredible character, of incredible ethics, to be resistant to that influence, to care enough about the principles that will keep us safe and keep us free, to be beyond that kind of influence. And I don't see it. I'm not going to name any names. I'm not going to play politics here. This is not a political program, although sometimes it feels like it easily could be. But I see an awful lot of power mongering going on. I see some folks who are determined to prove that if we'll just hand them the reins of power, hand them the reins of power, they'll do us a great job. But it's the power they're after. Purely and simply. And I've said this many times. I've even mentioned it in both my books, and I've written a couple of blog articles about this. And there are some folks who agree with this premise. The old adage is, of course, Emma's said that, or is reputed to have said, that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. There is this notion that power is basically the ultimate aphrodisiac, and even people of decent character can't resist it. And so when they get a taste of it, they kind of go a little crazy. And that power is in itself inherently corrupting. But I make the point that there is no greater power that a human being can have than a parent has over a newborn child. Infants are by nature completely and totally helpless and therefore dependent, completely and utterly dependent upon their caretakers for their very survival. There is no greater power than a person has than the literal power of life and death over that completely dependent entity that they hold in their arms. And yet most people of decency, most people of some character, approach that kind of power with a sense of awe and trepidation. They recognize that they have this power. And with that power, they sense a great responsibility. It is truly all in their hands. And they take that responsibility seriously. And with awe and reverence and trepidation and concern, careful to wield that power in the right way. So if power in itself, especially a lot of power, if it were inherently corrupting, then there could possibly be no good parents. It would be impossible. But that's not true. Power is not the corrupter. Corrupt character is the problem. Underdeveloped character. Disturbed and disordered character. Immoral character. That's the problem. Folks of impaired or disordered character, they go after power. Power is an agenda of theirs. In my workshops, I tell the professionals that analogous to the old axiom in the real estate business, that three things matter: location, location, and location. When it comes to the character impaired among us, only three things matter: position, position, and position. I've said that over and over again. I say it at all my workshops. I want people to kind of really get it down and understand it. Those individuals among us who are lacking in moral compass are rabid power seekers to start with. Power is the name of the game. It's what they're after. It is what they're after. They haven't come to serve anything. They've come to garner more power and influence. This is what they crave. And they often, instead of approaching that power with trepidation and with awe and a sense of deep responsibility, often Not only do they ravenously seek that power, but then they abuse it when they get it. As soon as they get it, they abuse it. Because they don't have the character to wield it responsibly. And so it's up to us. It's up to us to be very mindful of who we entrust power to. The founders knew this. They were very wary of this. They were especially wary of a powerful central government. They were especially wary of power, the power of government, period. This was envisioned as a free society where individuals took care of themselves, going by a moral code, and took care of the less fortunate and disadvantaged for the sake of the whole community. And again, out of a sense of moral decency, governed by their moral code. Now, one of the unfortunate things that has happened to us, one of the most unfortunate things that has happened to us, is the basic definition of what the needy truly are, who the needy truly are, has been rewritten to such an extraordinary extent. It's been redefined so that we see so many people who easily can fend better for themselves, but won't. And we also see those who easily could have, if the right attitudes in them were nurtured. Still, if we're going to make it as a society, we have to make it together. And it's because so many of us are so ill prepared to take on the responsibilities of life and to do what's necessary to hold things together, that unfortunately all of us need to pitch in. It's no longer going to be acceptable, not at least for a while, for each one of us to just mind our own business and go about our lives and let everything else go. We can't do that. And we're so used to living in a manner that we have lived that we feel compelled to grind it out every day. 2 breadwinners per family, grinding it out 40 plus hours a week just to make ends meet. And there's barely time for anything else. And our communities are suffering as a result. Our priorities are going to have a big second look. I see we got a caller calling in, and I'm going to take this call. Hello, and welcome to Character Matters.
Yes.
I see we got a caller. Yes, if you turn your radio down just a little bit, you'll be able to hear better. Hello, and welcome to Character Matters.
I sure will. What I wanted to ask you, Doctor, I agree with everything that you say, but when we've had individuals in our family that are character disordered already, how do we start to take them back when they're so dysfunctional? What can we do? I understand. I see where our society is, where we've come from, where we were at, like you were talking about, the moral integrity we used to have. We don't have that anymore.
Yeah.
And how do we start to take that back? And you were just talking about children, and the ultimate power is over a human life that is born to us. And unfortunately, with the society that we live in, and I go back to myself, I've made a lot of mistakes. And I look at my children and the things, and they're adults now, the dysfunction, and they're breeding the dysfunction. How do you go back and make a certain amount of amends, but still these people have to take responsibility and let go and learn to forgive and all that? But how can we, I know you've said one person at a time, but how do we do that, Doctor? How can we approach these people?
Well, you asked the question of the evening here. You mind if I ask you a couple of questions before I launch into some discussion about that? Have you tried to seek help before?
Yes, and I think what's really sad is I'm basically self-taught. And I have to say, it probably was about 8-9 years ago, I was given your book in sheep's clothing. And when that book was opened, it was like, wow, here it all is. And from there, it brought me to different, to the point where I've got a library of all this. But a lot of these professionals out there, they just don't get it. They don't seem to understand. And a lot of it they start to accept. And a lot of it, too, the old psychological thinking that maybe like Freudism and et cetera, they still have that thought.
That mindset, yes. Uh-huh.
Yes. And so it's basically you're talking against a wall, and they don't want you to give them new ideas or say, hey, this is the new thing out there. They already think they're the ones that are going to teach and help you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I see a real problem is where and who do you even go to?
Yeah. Well, and that's what's changing, and that's why I have, even though it is harder on me now than it has been in the past, that's one of the reasons why I'm out there doing some more professional trainings, and we're going to be doing a lot more of them over the next 2 years. And also the company that I'm working with is going to be producing some webinars and videos and that kind of thing to do as much training as we can. But, the community is starting to get a handle on this problem. It's nowhere near where it needs to be. I know exactly what you're saying. You probably, as I mentioned earlier, were one of those folks who may have even suffered therapy-induced trauma when you went for help and didn't get any. But your question basically is, so how do you do this? How do you basically deal with a person? Everybody's made mistakes. Okay, you got to start where you are. How do you begin to address the problem? I guess there's someone in your life who is character impaired and really needs some work, right?
Right. It's almost like we're losing our country. I agree with everything that you see. I say, just from the little bit you say, you're only touching the surface of this gigantic mess that we have in this country. And the only way we can start is by accepting responsibility ourselves. And then how do we go back to, say, our loved one? How is there an opening that we can work with? Because there just isn't enough professionals out there to do it. And a lot of these people, they don't want to go there.
Yeah. I'm going to give you the short answer, but I hope you'll stick around here because I might want to ask a follow-up after I give you this. But you asked the question of the night. This is a great question, but here's basically the three things that you have the power to do. One, you have the power to call out two things that are critical. You have the power to call out maladaptive behavior, and you have the power to call out the distorted thinking, the erroneous thinking that is behind the behavior. Behavior doesn't come from just anywhere. There's a certain way of looking at life, a certain way of thinking about things, certain attitudes about things that predispose a person's actions. So it's not just what they do, but it's the stinking thinking, as they say, behind those actions that are the problem. And you have the power to call those out. Now, how you call those out is really important. It's not so much the calling them out, it's the how. You call them out lovingly but you call them out directly and unashamedly. You don't hesitate to call them out. The person has to know that you care, but that you're not going to let a behavior that's inappropriate or harmful, or an attitude, a rotten attitude that's behind that behavior, you're not going to let it stand. So you call it out directly, and you invite the person to consider an alternative. And then,
may I ask you one question, Doctor?
Yes.
Just before you go any further, and I apologize for interrupting.
That's all right.
In starting a conversation with an individual, and I've tried this once, and it worked with just one person, and it wasn't to the degree of extreme character disorder, but I said, you know what, and I know they won't, but before we start, I'd like to say I apologize for anything in life that I may have hurt you. I'm sorry. I really can't go back and do anything about it, but we have the here and now.
Mm-hmm.
But this is what I see is the problem. Is that a way, because then you've, to that individual, accepted responsibility. You've also shown humbleness, but at the same time, you're showing direction. This is what we need to do.
That's very admirable. That's very admirable. Yes. And it's also potentially disarming, which is necessary to meet someone in the here and now. So yes, that's very good. The other thing you have the power to do is you have the power to model the kind of behavior that you want to see and the kind of thinking that you want to see. Yes, maybe you've made some mistakes in the past. Maybe, yes, you've created some wounds in the past. But if you've been working on your own character to forge a stronger character, to forge a better character, you can model what you have learned about human decency, about how to conduct your affairs. You can model that in the way you conduct yourself. And the third thing you have the power to do is you have the power to reinforce or endorse or support moves in the right direction. You know, we know that if we want any behavior to reoccur, we have to reinforce it. I mean, that's just basic science.
Right.
And unfortunately, today, what we reinforce culturally are all the wrong things. What we encourage and what we reinforce in our culture is counter to character development. So don't forget the power that you do have, especially if you're a parent. Is the person that you're talking about related to you?
Yes, I was talking about my children in specific, and they're older. They're in their late 30s and 40s. And from your conversation, and I take responsibility for this, in too many things I acquiesced to being, I don't like to engage in things. So a lot of times, and you're pressured by society because what used to be the norm is now, or what wasn't acceptable at one time is now the norm.
Yes.
So when somebody would say to me, well, this is normal behavior, and I said, well, what is normal behavior? Time and place dictates normal behavior.
Right.
So, you know, that's a cop-out. But the thing is for all the mistakes and leniency and laxity and everything else, you know, I've got my own responsibility, and I'm looking at it and saying, yes, I didn't have that strong moral character back then. I should have done that. And I hate to say it, but a lot of it is, and I don't want to say religious-based, but it's faith-based. And having a sound direction of what right and wrong is. I mean, if you even use the 10 Commandments as a guide, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not do. I mean, these are common sense good things that if you follow them, it's a good model for society. And even like you were talking, we had a president at one time said, the buck stops here.
Right.
And we don't have somebody like that anymore, like you were talking about. Yeah. And I think only as a nation and as a people, the only way we can take back anything is to stand firm. And you're talking about integrity and character. And I think character is it. It's character, the moral integrity for everybody.
Well, don't sell short the power that you do have. As a mother, you have the power to model character, and you have the power to encourage it. You have the power to call out things in a benign and loving way. There's nothing more effective than affection that is liberally and freely conveyed, but still accompanied with some standards for behavior and some standards for attitudes and governing principles of life. So when you warmly and lovingly confront a behavior or a disturbed or distorted way of thinking about things, an unhealthy way of thinking about things, and you invite the person to try something different and stand ready to reinforce and support their efforts and to champion those efforts and to convey your respect for their willingness to engage in those efforts to build a better character, you have a lot of power and a lot of influence. Don't give up hope. In many respects, in our character-disturbed age, 50 is the new 30. In many respects, I see many folks in my clinical practice who are just getting it in their 60s.
I understand. Hey, I'm right there, doctor. I'm not ashamed of that, but that is very true. But it's better late than never.
That's right.
Because we have to do something.
Yes.
And sometimes it's very hard to know how to approach these people because the first thing that they do is they're ready to fight. They want to engage, and the way that they can twist and turn and squirm words around is unbelievable. But we have to do something instead of ignoring because otherwise it just continues. So
thank you. Thank you so much for your call. We're running into the end of the hour here. Thank you so much for your call. It was a great question, great call. I hope you'll call in again sometime.
Oh, I will. And I'll tell you something, Doctor. It was an absolutely encouraging show, and I can't wait for your book. I really can't. And really do some more YouTubes. They're great. Thank you, Doctor.
Oh, thank you. Take care.
Okay, good night.
Bye-bye. Well, what a great call. Frankly, I can only think of one call that was that I had to exercise some editorial control over. But for the most part, just about everybody that has called this program has had some wonderful questions and wonderful comments to make, and I really do appreciate it. I really appreciate my audience. I know you're out there, and I know you're listening, and I appreciate the support. I invite you once again, as we're coming close to the end of the hour here, to avail yourself of the blog at manipulative-people.com. That's www.manipulative-people.com. The other blog at counselingwith2lsresource.com. My website, drgeorgesimon.com. My books, In Sheep's Clothing, Character Disturbance, and the Judas Syndrome, for those of you in the Christian faith community. And I also invite you to tune into this program every week on ucy.tv, where we talk about what I consider to be the defining issue of our time on character matters, because character does indeed matter. Our freedoms actually depend on it. And also check out the schedule for my workshop trainings on the at the webinars, workshops, and training page on my blog. And then if you want to contact me, use the Contact Dr. George Simon feature on the blog site, and you can get a hold of me directly. So we're up of another program for this week, and I hope you'll tune in again next week at the same time, 7 p.m. Eastern, for another edition of Character Matters. I'm Dr. George Simon. Thanking you for listening. I'll see you again next week.